Hello, and welcome to our Tuesday evening workshop. We're pleased to have with us Don Garish from Eaton Peabody Consulting, who will talk to us about the timeline for the administrator search. And I also wanted to note that he has given us an updated timeline to all of us, and perhaps later that could be updated on our website, Madam Clerk. Please take it away, and then we will ask questions and go from there.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to work with you. I want to talk a little bit about myself so that the public understands my experience. I am a retired Maine manager. I had 39 years in the profession. Actually, I was the assistant town manager in Auburn from 76 to 79. Then I went to Gorham. I was 10 years as the manager in Gorham. And then I went to Brunswick, and I was the manager there and retired after 20 years in Brunswick. I've worked for Eaton Peabody Consulting Group since 2009, and mainly doing searches, executive searches. I've done over 70 in the last 13 years now, 14 years. And that's anywhere from bigger communities, smaller communities. I've done South Portland, I've done Auburn, number of communities in the state. I also do interim work. I was interim in a number of communities while I did the manager searches to help them out. Today I don't do as many interims, but I am busy doing searches. So that's a little bit about me and my experience. I was president of the International City Managers Association many years ago, so I have some ties to the network of the ICMA throughout the country. And I really have focused on helping communities hire managers or executives in the last 13 to 14 years. So I sent you a draft timeline. I had to make a few changes in it because of some commitments I have to make. But for me, this is the document we need to talk about and we all need to agree upon, because this sets the time frame and the process we will use going forward. And that's helpful for a number of reasons. Number one, it helps candidates know what the timeline is going to be. The market, I will tell you right now, is not as strong as it has been over the years. We're not seeing the numbers or the quality of people applying for jobs. Doesn't mean we won't get one here, I will tell you that, but it has decreased over the years. As an example, 8 years ago I did Bar Harbor, we had 65 applications. A year and a half ago I did it, we got 18 applications. And that just gives you an idea of what we're seeing. People aren't moving. COVID had a big didn't help managers moving because of COVID. Housing costs is a big issue today when people are looking to move around in this profession. And we're not seeing as many people get in the profession. But doesn't mean we won't be able to go through the process. I'm doing Cape Elizabeth. We had 23 applicants. We're interviewing 5 people the next couple days. We got some good applications. I've done Yarmouth, I did Madawaska up in the county. We had only 8 applications, but we had 2 excellent apps. So it depends on the community, it depends what's happening, but I feel confident we will find the right person. As I say to the elected officials, it only takes one person, that right person, to be the right person for your community. So that's a little bit about what's happening in the field and a little bit about what I see happening as we go forward. So this timeline, there's some questions I'm going to ask you that I need answers for as we talk about it, what you want to see, where you want to advertise, who you want to participate in the process. But this just gives you an idea of how we have done the process in the past. Let me talk about one of the things that we do that some people doing this process do. We will come in and interview all your department heads one-on-one and get from them. I asked them 2 questions. What do you see as the issues facing Lewiston in the next 5 years, and what you're looking for in a new city administrator, excuse me. Qualifications, education, experience, personality, and trying to get a flavor for what your staff is. And my email will be given to anybody who works for you who wants to give me that. They can email that information to me, and I will take it. I also offer to hold a public session, invite the public to come in, and I ask them the same 2 questions to allow them to have some input into the process. I run the meeting. The meeting is a positive meeting. We're here to move forward. We're not here to go backwards. We're here to talk about the future of Lewiston and what they're looking for. At the end, I put a document together. That is a public document that candidates can see, you can see, the public will see. And what it will be a list of what I heard. It won't be that the police chief said this or this citizen said this. It will be a compilation of what I heard. And these have been, candidates like them, it starts to get a feel for what's going on in the community. And it may help you as we're looking to hire somebody. So I offer that to you. It's your decision if you want me to do it. So that's my first question. Is that something you'd like to see our firm do for you?
Yes, Councilor Gallant.
Thank you, Mayor. Based on what you said, yes, I love the idea, but will it be, for lack of better words, filtered in some ways? I mean, if you get one person who's negative all the way around.
I run the meeting. I'm very strict about that. If people get offline and start talking about this person did this, we don't like that, or something, I'll cut them off. I won't let them continue because it doesn't help us. We're looking here for the future, so I put down what we hear that is positive, and that's what I will do.
What about the emails that are sent from department
I
heads,
do the
whoever?
same thing.
Okay, thank you.
I do the same thing. We're not here to rehash past issues. We're here to move forward and be positive, and that's what we need to do.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Councilor Najin.
One of the things I'd like to see added to that, actually, if it's possible to have something added to it, is just some type of roundtable or feedback from the business community. Maybe we look at the LA Metro Chamber or some specific both developers in business and housing and small businesses to just kind of get some feedback from their perspective on what we could see as an administrator as well.
I will put together, if you want to do this, and we'll set a time frame, I will put a notice that we've used in the past that you can advertise on your webpage, you can put out in the paper, and it addresses everyone, business community, social service agencies, anybody that wants to, and my email address will be on it. They can't come, they can send it to me. So it's open. Sometimes, couple places I've done this and no one showed up. I will tell you, other places, the biggest one I ever had was about 85 in Rockland a number of years ago. There were some issues going on there, I have to tell you, this is a story, and I just tell you because I think you can see how it works. We're there for 2.5 hours, 85 people, and it was positive. We made sure it was positive. At the end of the meeting, everyone had spoken. This local fisherman said, I'd like to comment, and I said, certainly, come up. And he got up to the mic and he says, there's only one request. I want you to hire the cheapest bastard you can to keep my taxes down. And that just gives you an idea of the different influx of people, and that wasn't bad, but that's something that someone said. So just that's what we do, and I think it's been positive. We've done it the last 10, 15 years, and that's been positive. So if you want me to do that, I will do that. So is that something you want?
Councilor Chittum.
Thank you, Mr. Garish. Yes, we've heard from the public several times that the public would like to be involved in this whole process, so I'm fully in favor of having a roundtable, an open discussion, wherein anybody who has any interest in the city administrator has the opportunity to comment and make observations. I do say that we ought to be not ignoring the past. We should be learning from mistakes of the past. And I'm not making any particular references. I'm simply saying that if our eye is only toward the future, then we've ignored our history, and our history is an important part of who we are.
Well, I think someone can come up and say, listen, I want someone who is familiar with finances because in the past we haven't done a good job there. Or someone who is very good with grant writing because we haven't done it. Those are positive, but when it gets personalities and naming people, that's not what I'm looking for, just so you'll know.
Good, good.
Okay. So
Councillor, one second, Mr. Garish. Councillor Sol, did you have something?
I just wanted to agree that I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it's really important to have the public weigh in on, especially this decision. So I think it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Councillor Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll jump into, I will say that I think it's really important for everybody, and everybody gets heard and has their time. So, yeah, everybody's got a stake in this. So, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Administrator O'Malley, can you look on the calendar? How many weeks away is August 5 to 8 from now?
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Okay.
I changed it from the original one I gave you. It was only a week. And we can move that out. If you want more time to advertise, that's not a problem. You need to get the advertisement out. You need to set a date. I need to set my date so I can come up. Normally what I do is I'll come during the day, meet with your staff, stay at night, and hold the public meeting. So that was 2 weeks out. If you want to do it, we can have the ad ready to do tomorrow if you want to. But that,
Yeah,
if you want more time, we certainly can move that.
if we're going to hold a public meeting, 2 weeks is really the minimum amount of notice that we should give people. And so, yeah, if it's, we need to give the public 2 weeks.
That's fine.
Okay, whatever date it happens to be.
Okay.
Councillor Najin.
And I just wanted to add on to that this entire process, I'm looking forward to it being a transparent process that people can engage in. Ultimately, I think some of the roles of municipal government are a bit arcane and also confusing for folks, as concerning what powers elected and hired officials and appointed officials have, and the more opportunity for them for people to see the process, I think it helps in order to one, make sure that we're on the right path, and two, to make it so there's nothing behind the curtain, so to speak.
Having said that, I'm going to jump to the end a little bit. We still have other issues, but what we also offer is we'll go through a process where we get the resumes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. They come to me. I will send an email to each of you every week, how many we've gotten, how many from Maine. That's always an issue. And I'll keep you updated as we go through it. When the final date ends of our advertisement, I will review them. I will make recommendations to you who I think you ought to consider to interview, but you will get a booklet with all the resumes in them, so you can look at them. That's fine, but I will make a recommendation to you from my experience and talking to staff and talking to you who I would consider. We will then have a meeting and decide who you want to interview. Once we narrow down the finalists, one of the things that we've done in the past, and this is your input, we have allowed, some communities have allowed the department heads to interview the finalists. They don't get a vote, but how that would work, most of the time we have 2 finalists. Bring them in, department heads meet them, ask questions. Department head can ask them. After the meeting, I will say, what is positive? What concerns do you have for each candidate? I will bring those to you when you have your final interviews. We also have in the past what we call a meet and greet, where we'll bring the finalists in, have the public come in and be able to meet them informally, maybe have the candidates speak, but it's an opportunity to bring the public in one more time, again, to have them meet. And so that's a decision you'll have to make if you want to do that also. That's why I jumped to it, because I think you want to have public input. That's one of the ways we have done that in the past. Any comments or questions about that? That's something you would do.
Councillor Harriman.
Thank you. Yeah, I like both of those ideas. Just I feel like getting more input is important, and where it's such a big role, such an important role for the city, I feel like having that, the public and department heads weigh in at the beginning and also closer to the end is not a bad idea.
The one issue I will tell you that may come up, when we narrow it down to the finalists names will be public. And some candidates, I'm up front with every candidate that applies to let them know that's part of the process. If you're a finalist, your name is going to be public. Now, someone might withdraw, I just will tell you that doesn't want to do that. That happens once in a while, but in the end, I will do complete background checks on your finalists. Educational, financial, criminal, thank you, sorry. Criminal, I will do checks on their history, where they've worked. I will check with people who, they give you references. I will check other people, I just don't use them. And I will give you all a document, what I hear, what I find from those finalists. So you will have that before you get to the final. So, and I always tell the candidates, if you're a finalist, I'm going to talk to where you're working now, so the word's going to get out, so you need to do it. Does that sound good at the end? I jumped a little bit, but is that work for everybody? Okay.
Councilor Roy, did you have something?
Thank you. I probably forgot this, I was told this. Where are these candidates coming from? Is it just New England, Maine?
That's my next question
All right,
for you.
good. Thank you.
The next question I need from is where you want to advertise. This is a major position in the state of Maine. I would recommend that you, as normal, you advertise on your website. You advertise on Maine Municipal. That doesn't cost you anything. That's free. I would recommend you advertise on the ICMA, International City Managers Association. That's the national website that anybody in the United States looking for a job is going to look there. Many communities also will advertise in New England, and I would recommend you do New Hampshire and Massachusetts. They're the two major states that have a lot of managers in them, and it doesn't hurt to give them a little more shot there. So those are the ones I would recommend you do. ICMA will cost you $450 for a month's advertisement. Between New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they're more expensive. They're going to cost you between $800 and $900. No, combined for the two of them to advertise for a month. And that's what we normally recommend, is advertising for a month for the position. Some have asked us to advertise on Indeed and what's the other one? We have had no success, I just want to tell you, in any of those. They're very expensive, and we get many, many resumes that are worthless. I'm sorry. It doesn't specialize enough for what you're looking for. So those are the ones I would recommend that you advertise in. I think you will get the best bang for your buck and the most legitimate resumes and people interested in the job. Now, I will tell you right now, if we advertised in ICMA and I put it in tomorrow, I will get the same 6 resumes I've been getting for all the other ones that they just send them out whenever there's a new one. But you will get some people that, for me, the key for out of state is, do they have some connection to Maine? Do they know it? Have they been to college in Bates, Bowdoin, or Colby? Have they grandparents lived there? I will talk to anybody, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I will talk to anybody I recommend to you. I will have done a preliminary investigation of them to find out why they want to come to Maine. Why would someone from Oklahoma want to come to Maine? Not saying they don't have good reasons, but I do some background checks when I do that. So that's how I do it. So are we okay with those two? Yes.
Councilor Chittum, yes.
Thank you. What about social media? Some of us have LinkedIn accounts. How would you coordinate something like that, or you do not recommend it?
LinkedIn has been the worst one I've ever done. I'm sorry. I got 250 applications from LinkedIn. There was not and I'm being honest here, not a single person that would even qualify for. Everybody thinks everybody thinks that they can do this job. If you want me to, I'll do it, but I'm just telling you, it's a waste of time, in my opinion, but that's up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Sol.
Earlier, you were talking about all the different towns and cities that you have done all these interviews for. Is it just for city administrator that you search for? Is that-
Oh, I've done finance directors, police chiefs.
It's a whole broad of.
Yeah, I actually did, I actually ran the Metro bus system in Portland for a year while they were looking for one. We hired a new general manager of that. I just did the new general manager of the Freeport Sewer District. I've done the head of the main bond bank, so it's, the head of the economic development in Presque Isle, so it's a number of
When you
them.
get all the resumes, how do you narrow it down to the ones that you're going to send to us? Do you have to interview all these people, or do you just sort of look at their resume and?
I don't interview everybody I get. I've done it enough, I'll be honest with you, that I can look at their resume and be prepared for some crazy resumes when you get them and look at them. Some people just don't know how to write a resume. And that's an important part of what you look at is the professionalism that they write, their experience, be honest with you, if someone who's in the profession, I will check them out first, do a Google search, see if they've lost their job recently, if they've been fired, if they have a Facebook page, those sort of things. So I look at every single one of them. I just don't, but then I focus in on the ones I think that may bring something to the job and may be worth an interview. Everybody brings something different. Everyone brings a expertise or an area that they are in. And so you try to look at, if we get someone that meets all the criteria, we'll hire that person right away, but you really don't do that. And you have to look at their experience, the size of communities they've been in, what type of work they've been in, what type of communities are they? Are they a college community or not? Are they a community of this size? Are they very small? I look at all that, and that's how I do it. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so
Councilor Chittum.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Garish, but this follows nicely. Every community, as you know, has its own distinct personality, and one of the keys here is to fit the successful applicant with the personality of Lewiston, our community, who we are. So I'm glad you mentioned that. You touched on it, and I think it's important to highlight that this is a meshing of personalities, and we have to take that very seriously into account.
you took the words up, what I was going to say. I always say this to the elected. It's not the person with the most experience, the most education, the best personality. You certainly want those traits, but they've got to fit your community. That's as important as anything that you do, is to have that person fit your community. And some people who are very good candidates, after you interview them, we do the research, maybe doesn't fit there. It's that person that is able to fit in with your community. And that's as critical as anything that you look at. I agree 100%. Where we advertise, we all set on that? Okay. If this schedule, and let me kind of read it, because if we're going to change it, I need to know now. Oh, my other comment to all of you. This is a very important decision that you're going to make for the community. And I encourage, I don't insist, but I encourage that you all participate in every process that we do. It's important for you to get to know your candidates. As important, it's important that the candidates see who their potential bosses are. So once we do this timeline, it's pretty much set in stone. Things happen, sickness, I understand all that, but once we do this, we kind of try to stay with this to make sure the process is clean, everybody knows what it is. So I just wanted to mention that to you. Having said that, if we can set up the public meeting the week of August 5th through the 8th, and we'll take a look at that. If that doesn't work, we'll just move everything a week forward, and I'll redo this if we have to change the date of that. But I will draft.
And just, sorry, Mr. Garish, and just to be clear, I'm fine to have it whenever. I just want there to be a full 2 weeks from the time the ad hits the paper, our website and wherever else we're advertising meetings these days.
I'll work with
to-
Kathy and Brian on that and figure a date, and I have to look at my schedule too to make sure it works, but,
Councilor Najin, did you have something to add to that?
The only thing I would add on to that is, if we're going to do the public meeting sometime between the August 5th and August 8th, I'm wondering if there's another opportunity to hold a public meeting on a separate week. And the reason why I ask for that is in the summertime, there are people who are very engaged in our community who are absent for, a few weeks at a time. And I just want to make sure, if we can, that we're getting that opportunity, and maybe it's done as a roundtable. Maybe it's not like a public meeting with feedback. Maybe it's done in another fashion. But I just wanted to put that forward.
I try to hold these public meetings and the meetings with the department heads before we finalize the ad. And that's just try to get as much input as we can before we do the ad. So I understand the concern, but I would say no matter when we hold it, someone's not going to be able to do that. And my email will be in the notice, and they can email me to do that. So that's my comment.
Councilor Glant?
Thank you, Mayor. This is more for the team back there. Will it be publicized, broadcast? So anybody who's not going to be there?
Oh, yes, yeah.
That way there, they get the email, so that would not be a point. If they're out of town, they can still tune in.
Yeah, we'll have it in city council chambers so we can televise it.
Yeah, it's great if we hold it and it's taped and it can be shown after that, the public can see, and so, yeah, that works really well. So,
Madam Clerk, we could also perhaps, kind of make it easy for people and create a form on the website that would have those 2 questions, places for people to type in their responses, and would just head straight to him.
Sure. We're happy to do whatever the council would like. I mean, Mr. Garish did say that he's going to put his email address in there and folks can reach out directly, but we can certainly put something on the website letting folks know those 2 questions if they wanted to specifically respond to answer those 2 questions, absolutely.
We could share the link. They could click on it, quickly fill out the form, and
Sure.
be done with it.
Sure.
I think anything we can do to make it easier for the public is going to be increase participation.
So if we're able to do this, my goal is to have the ad finalized in place August 13th, which is Tuesday. And that can move a little bit, but that would be my goal. The deadline then would be September 10th. That's about 4 weeks from that. Like I said, each week I will send you an email updating where we are. What we do is on that Tuesday, once we finalize them, I'm reviewing them as they come in, but on Wednesday, I will finalize, I will put a memo together, I'm sorry, here, and the staff will put this booklet together for each one of you. And what we do is we overnight it out of our Augusta office. We could even have it hand-delivered here, but we'll see how that works. We usually send it to either the mayor or the council president to be distributed. And the only reason we do that is for confidentiality purposes. We could send it here, and I'm sure will be no problems, but we just like to be sure that it just gets to you and then it's distributed to all of you. So you will one of you, and we'll work that out. We'll get it overnight, and it will be delivered to you on Friday. If we're able to get it done, you'll get it on Thursday. Depends on the numbers we have. Then that next week, September 16th to the 19th, it'll give you time to read it. We'll set a date. Well, I will come, and we will sit down and discuss the candidates, discuss who we'd like to interview, and go through that process. So that week is a key week to do that. After you decide who you want to interview, now, it depends on the numbers that we get, the quality we get, but I would suspect, I'm hoping to get 25 to 28 applications. I think that would be good. And from there, I'm hoping to have 5 to 6 good candidates that we will interview. If we do that, then the first round of interviews, if there's someone locally, we will do it in person. If they're from out of state, we will do a Zoom meeting, because the first one, we'll invite them to come, but it's up to them. And we move that along pretty quickly, that if we meet on the week of the 16th, we will have the interviews the very next week, because we want to keep moving. And the reason we want to do that is because sometimes managers are looking at a number of jobs, and you can lose candidates if you don't move things along. So the week of the 23rd through the 26th, we'll probably need 2 days. We'll discuss all this later, where we're going to hold them, how we're going to do it. But I just want to let you know, once we decide, there's a quick turnaround. Once we decide, and before that, I will draft questions that I will send to all of you as a suggestion. You don't have to accept them. You can add your own. You can delete them. But there's some standard questions that I've used that I think are good. But I also ask questions based upon what we've heard, what are the issues, what we're looking for from those candidates. So there will be a mixture of some standard questions, and there'll be some questions that are very particular to Lewiston to get their reaction to. I will send those out. You can review them. I say you can delete, add, or whatever you want to do. If you get back to me, we'll put the documents together. So once we do the first round of interviews, most likely we will narrow it down. Sometimes we narrow it down. A couple times we've only had one good candidate. That makes it a little more complicated, but many times we're able to narrow it down to 2. A couple times we've had 3 great candidates, so it depends on what we get. Once we do that, then we will schedule 2 weeks later, this is October 7th through the 10th, we will schedule the finalists to come to Lewiston. And normally what we do, we'll have one night where we'll have the meet and greet. It's one night with both candidates. It helps the public. They don't have to come out twice. They can meet the candidates one time. I kind of, and I say this and not trying, I try to keep tabs on what's going on. Many times the public takes a lot of time with each candidate, and I try to move them along so everybody gets a chance to talk to them, but most of the time it works pretty good. So we'll have a meet and greet. The next thing probably is if they're not familiar with Lewiston, we'll bring them in, get them to go around to your facilities. If they haven't been here before, we'll schedule that. They can go and meet staff in each of your buildings. And then we'll schedule, probably in the afternoons, your department heads to have those interviews, one at one time, one at another time. And that night, you would then have your second round of interviews. So,
Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Mayor. When they go around, you're not looking for all of us to be like puppy dogs. That's going to be something the administrator currently, or you will take care of? I
will take care of it with them. Yeah, this is for them to go around, and it's casual, but to meet and get to know the city.
Good, thank you.
And then we'll do the final interviews, and we'll figure the dates out. After you do that, hopefully you'll have the candidate you want, and you'll talk about having a contract with them. I offer my services to negotiate a contract with the candidate. I've done it probably in every one I've done, but and your city attorney should look at whatever it is, but I usually work with you. You give me parameters, we negotiate a contract. So
How many, so what was the last meet and greet that you did for your municipality? Where was that?
Well, I did it in Auburn, I did it in South Portland, I've done it,
How many people came to the Auburn meet and greet?
25, 30,
How many people went to South Portland?
50.
50, okay. Just to get a sense based on.
I had a couple when no one showed up. But,
That's like extra cheese and crackers for you.
yeah, I won't tell you the community, but it was Ellsworth, so.
It was elsewhere, you said?
Ellsworth, many years ago. Yeah.
Typical for them, I hear.
Yeah,
So,
I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry.
Councilor Nagy.
Just one piece we didn't put in here, and I think it might be good. We have a lot of intermunicipal agreements, and so just on some level, I think, obviously not interviewing managers of other towns or anything like that, but just kind of making that, be aware. We provide services for a lot of communities around us, being the center of, for instance, the trash facility, and also the LAPCA, and also the superintendent of the schools.
Certainly.
I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
Councilor Chittum.
Thank you, Mr. Garish. In your first draft of the timeline, you had a 1-week period between the first round of interviews and the meet and greet, and in this, it's been slipped to 2 weeks. You made a point of moving forward and moving along quickly. Why is there the extra week thrown into this second schedule?
You're talking about the first round and the second round?
Yes, initially you had proposed a 1-week delay between the first round and the meet and greet, and in this revised schedule, it's a 2-week.
I did that because of logistics, and if you have a candidate coming from flying in and making those arrangements, 2 weeks is, you got to give some time to be able to do that, so that's why I did it. Probably I was moving too fast when I only had a week between the first interviews and the second. We usually do 2 weeks. To be able to set it up, to make sure, we have the dates. So that was the reason, that's all.
In keeping with your comment that once we have focused on 1 or 2 candidates, we need to move along rapidly, is it possible to go back to the 1-week schedule that you'd originally proposed?
I would suggest that once you have 2 finalists, 2 weeks will not make a difference.
Okay.
Because they know they're finalists in the position. The other part is when they don't know where they are in the process, they'll keep looking.
Sure.
But once they're finalists, they know
Okay.
the potential to have the job is there, and you won't see them back out. I just
Okay.
will tell you.
Thank you.
And do the finalists, do they travel here at their own expense, or if other municipalities paid for that, or how does that work?
Yeah, the finalists, if you bring them in, will be at the city's expense. And that will include their spouses to come. It's important to make sure that the spouses are involved and are okay with a move or whatever is going to happen. And some come, some don't, and that would be, it depends, flying them and putting them up for a couple days, paying for their meals and things like that, so.
Gotcha, thank you. Please continue.
No, that's the process. That's what we've used, and I think if this is the way we go, we'll move on it very quickly and try to get this settled, and I'll talk to, and schedule the date for the meet and greet, and if we have to put it off 1 week, that's not a problem. We'll just move things out a little bit.
Does staff have any questions about the process?
No, we're all set. Donna, can we just get a copy of that updated
Yep.
schedule? Thank you.
And if perhaps we can put this on the website too, Madam Clerk?
The timeline?
Yes, the updated timeline.
We won't put it up until we definitely know the date of the public meeting,
That's
because that's critical as we move forward. But I'll talk with them tomorrow and make sure, and if we can schedule that and get it out and get the notice in time to meet the 2 week, then we can move this along very quickly.
no, makes sense. Councilor Chittum, did you have something?
Yes, I did. Mr. Garish, do you have a copy of our current or the most recent contract with the city administrator?
No, I will need copies of that contract. Your personnel policy is probably on the website, so that's important. Just talk a little bit about contracts. We are seeing, I don't know, well, I will tell you, 3-year contract is a normal contract that we do. I've done 3 or 4 recently 5-year contracts, and that was because the community wanted to tie the person up for 5 years. But 3 years is normal. I don't suspect your contract is any different than what we see in the field today. The big issues are pay, health benefits, retirement, time off, and the other big one is severance. Is a big issue for people in the profession. You can terminate someone for cause, and you don't owe them anything. If you terminate someone just because you want to terminate them, there's going to be a severance clause in there where you'll have to pay a certain amount. I don't think that's new to you, but that's the profession out there today.
No, that's fine. And second question is, you're familiar, you know our corporate counsel, Brandon Isaacson.
I know, I don't know who you use there, but I know them, right?
Okay.
And if you're happy with your contract, we will just use that and work through that. I do contracts all the time, and I don't know when's the last time you updated your contract, but there's some, I can talk to them, there's some wording that I would suggest to protect the community that you might want to do, but, I mean, we'll take care of it down the road to make sure it's most up to date.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity here to put as many eyes as possible on an agreement between a potential city administrator and the city, and for us to not take advantage of that opportunity would be foolhardy.
Yeah.
Councilor Najin, did you have something?
I just have one question, and I don't know if this has ever happened, and I'm not suggesting that it should, but let's say we come to the end of the process and we haven't found candidates that the council is satisfied with. What do we do in that case?
We go back out.
Okay.
My contract with you is a fixed fee contract. I'm here till you hire somebody. It's only happened to me twice in the last 10 years that we've had to go out twice. Gardner, we had to go out twice. Millnocket, we went out twice. Just didn't work out, but my fee does not change. I'm here till it's done. You might have some additional fees for advertising, but the flat fee that I charge you is the same until you hire somebody.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm all set if you folks are. I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you, and we will find somebody. I can tell you that.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking through the process with council. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Sure.
We will win in the end.
You will. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, Mr.
Thank
Garish.
you, Mr. Garish.
We are now moving forward to discussion and review of the Business Licensing Ordinance regarding the licensing of shelters. And we're pleased to have our Madam Clerk join us. If you want to kick us off, Madam Clerk, and then we can go from there.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the past few council workshops, I'm blanking on the dates right now, June 4th and July 16th, the council had talked about some of the shelter overlay districts, and during that conversation mentioned that they'd also like to take a look at the business license ordinance that licenses shelters. So we have provided in your packet a quick memo just giving you some of the background on that. Homeless shelters have been licensed in the city for over 40 years. We currently have 6 shelters in the city that are licensed, in operation and licensed. We've also provided you with a copy of the current ordinance. The current ordinance, It's always been on the books that shelters be licensed in Lewiston, but in 2 years ago, the mayoral task force reviewed homeless shelters and really recommended a lot of enhancements to the ordinance. So that task force created a draft update. It went to the council at the time. They made several amendments, and then it was finally adopted. So that's been on the books for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then simultaneously at that same time, there were some amendments to the land use code regarding the shelter overlay and definitions. So when it was briefly discussed at the July 16th joint workshop with the planning board, one of the recommendations and requests was to just flip the location of the definitions. The definition of homeless shelter and no barrier shelter is located in the land use code, and the Business License Ordinance just references the land use code. The recommendation or request from the council was simply just to flip that. So we can certainly do that. We view that as a housekeeping change, unless, of course, you have changes to the actual definition. So at this point, Mr. Mayor, staff is not bringing forth any recommended changes. This is really an opportunity for us to hear from the council what you would like for changes. So we can go section by section, or however you'd like to review it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Harriman, you were on the shelter committee, right? Yeah. And I remember, yes, the housing committee did think that there should be guidelines, but there was, I remember the discussions then, and maybe not in like complete detail, but there were many things that the housing committee, kind of acquiesced to that perhaps they didn't ultimately support. And so have we heard from Craig Saddlemeyer on this, or did he chime in over email?
I have not heard from Mr. Saddlemeyer, but just for clarification, the order for the current ad hoc committee is for them to review the possibility of the creation and establishment of a city-connected, city-sponsored homeless shelter. I'm not sure that their specific charge that they were requested to look at the ordinance. They certainly could, but I don't believe in their council order for the charge asked them to take a look at the ordinance, but I can certainly be corrected by Councilor Roy.
No. Understood. I guess I remember conversations at the time when Craig Seidelmeyer was, the council wanted to take, a really draconian, stance towards licensing shelters. And so there was a number of concerns I know that the shelter committee had at the time, and I guess it would be, I don't know if we're able to remember any of them now, Councilor Harriman, but that would be one place to start. Councilor Harriman, did you want to weigh in on any of that before I recognize somebody else?
I would just, I do have written down in my notes here, I would like to hear from the current shelter committee at some point if they have recommendations of any changes that might need to be made. We're just workshopping this tonight, so they could weigh in at any point before we bring this up on an agenda. But if there are things, I look through it myself and I have some suggestions, but if there are things that they suggest that they see as issues for opening a shelter, then they have more in-depth experience in that field.
And the annual shelter license expires February 28th of each year, so we do have some time to take a look at workshopping some changes, having the council approve them, and having them go into effect before the next license year.
No, and having the current shelter committee review that would make a lot of sense. Mr. Sandmeyer serves on that, as do a number of other members also served on the prayer committee. Councilor Roy, did you have something?
I would just bring this back to shelter committee, and we can go through it. I do believe right now we have a timeline to present to the council very shortly from now. So again, certainly we can look at this and maybe come up with some recommendations, if that's.
And having said all, sorry, please, were you?
No, all done.
Okay. Having said all that, doesn't preclude myself and the councilors from making suggestions now. So, Councilor Chittum.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to figure out how we make this an efficient process. I think by now you know me, I'm a nitpicker, and I have all kinds of red ink over the existing ordinance. So I'd like to figure out how we can do an efficient, productive process to go through this, and I'm open to any suggestions.
I like what the clerk just said, section by section, then we can all chime in on each section before we move forward, and that keeps the conversation, kind of fresh in our minds versus one person running through the entire document and the next person running through, et cetera, et cetera.
Mr. Mayor, could I just ask Councilor Chittum, if
absolutely.
you have a lot, Councilor, would it be efficient for us to take photocopies of your notes and distribute it to the council so it's easier for them to follow along if you have a lot of changes?
I'd be happy. I'd be ecstatic to do that. I've been loath to do it because of my fear about communications outside council meetings and workshops and so on. But if we can do that within the context of this workshop, I'm happy to share that. Now,
To that end, is there anybody else who has substantial markups on this document? Councilor Najin?
I just think that
There's a
when we're
staple
talking
in
about
there.
these particular pieces, one of the things that
Sorry, one second. Administrator O'Malley? I'm just double checking. So is there anyone else here who has substantial markups to the document? No? Okay, all right. Please continue, Councilor.
I think that in the end, the majority of the recommendations that came from the Shelter Committee were actually accepted by the council. And that was done based on the main housing guidelines, which are going to be the funding mechanism. One of the things that I think is a challenge is financial capacity, especially when it involves nonprofit organizations that are religious-based. I look at a traditional land trust, for instance, right? Like they would have 6 months of operating expenses available in cash flow, and that's something that we could possibly put forward a requirement for. But I think it's a challenge with faith-based organizations because those funding mechanisms aren't always available to the public, right? It's private source. So I think the biggest pieces are, for me personally, are buffers, how they exist, where they exist, the approval process, and then also remediation of or redress of grievances when there's an issue. And ultimately, we took language from the marijuana laws and put that in there concerning the licensing, and I think that perhaps there should be something that's a little bit more ironed out concerning like I don't know if it's a step process or how we address it, but I know that, like for instance, have we ever shut down a marijuana grow in the city?
Not to my knowledge, we have not shut one down, no.
So I'm just thinking about like the ways in which, so for instance, if there becomes like a public endangerment issue with any shelter that's open, right? How do we address that in such a way that that the shelter can continue to operate as long as it's not, putting its guests in danger and also not putting undue stresses on the community that it's directly connected to. And I think just spelling those out in some type of better detail, or possibly us not doing it at all, allowing staff to come up with the suggestions in order to do that, and then we say, yes, this is good or bad, right? Because ultimately, I don't know how easy it is to enforce one thing or another thing, but I do know that if we have like a series of traffic accidents, for instance, or if we have broken windows in a particular location, things like that, those are things that my constituents are going to ask me to look into, and I want to know what tools we're going to have in order to get those addressed.
In the business license ordinance, there is language in there that staff has the authority to suspend a business license if it's an emergency, urgent situation for public health, safety, welfare. We can go in and just suspend their business license. Then there's also language in the business license ordinance where a license can be revoked or denied at the council level, obviously for just cause and after sort of a hearing and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Anything further, Councilor Najin, at this time?
Not at the moment.
Yeah. Councilor Goulet.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a lot of concerns, which we'll cover shortly, but I want to make sure we keep in mind we grandfather the 6 that are currently out there, that we don't burden them to have to do things based on what's here. This is a new timeline going forward for new applications, and renewal applications should still be grandfathered, so we don't lose 6 of our current situations come February. That's the concern that I have.
I guess there are certain things that we had added to the licensure in terms of reporting that I think there are certain aspects of the licensure ordinance, the license ordinance, that really should apply to all shelters. And I think reporting was one of them, and maybe 1 or 2 other things. But yeah, I agree that, as a matter of process, we should not create additional burden for currently running shelters.
I agree with that, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Chittum.
You said it, Mr. Mayor.
Anything further while we wait for the copies? Councilor Longchamps.
So I'm wondering, how long is this process? Like, or what's our goal? I'm sorry if I've already heard it, but
I think.
to actually get a shelter up and running.
You mean the process to get a shelter up and running, or the process to modify this license ordinance?
As far as a shelter opening.
Councilor Roy, did you want to take that question?
To be quite honest with you, we are putting together an RFP right now for a shelter proposal, and to get proposals from the community.
Because I'd like to just share a little something. So about 30 minutes before I was headed here, as most people know, I own a store right in downtown. And a lovely 90-year-old woman, I'm trying really hard not to cry. She's in the audience. But she's 90 years old and homeless now because someone bought her building, and I can't imagine at 90 years old. And there's no place for her to go. So I'm taking her home with me. But
Councilor Chittum.
Yeah, thank you. I think the goal here, Councilor Longchamp, is to do this as expeditiously as possible. I'm very encouraged. I received a call from Mr. Settlemeyer this afternoon, and the shelter committee that, under the direction of Councilor Roy, has been making fantastic progress. This can't be done overnight, but I think we all recognize the urgency, and I'm very pleased with the progress that the ad hoc committee is making toward getting a shelter stood up. I'll remind you also that we have allocated money for a warming shelter, which is different, a warming center, I'm sorry, I keep saying that word, a warming center. We're doing that in August this year, July this year, instead of February as we did earlier. So believe me, we all hear you, and I think all 8 members of this council are of one mind that we need to do this as rapidly as possible.
Councilor Najin.
I would also just throw out there that I think the biggest challenge right now, the licensing is in place. There may be some pieces of the licensing that need to be adjusted, but it's the overlay that is keeping other people from opening up a shelter within our community. And a city-directed shelter does not necessarily preclude other types of shelter facilities that could possibly open up that have specific need-based clientele. Just to speak to that, we have a domestic violence shelter. We have a Shelter by Jesus operates for a particular client set. And so there may be opportunity when we talk about the overlay and how the buffer pieces actually work to have anybody who's capable come forward to ask to get something licensed immediately. I would also suggest to Councilor Bergeron, I'm sorry to, that's an extremely emotional issue, obviously. We should probably have a conversation with our GA office and figure out if there's something there that can help. And it would be nice, as we're talking about all of these things, to figure out if there's some type of support mechanism where when somebody is in a situation where they're becoming homeless, is there some type of, and I don't know if it's our GA office that does that. I don't know if it's a separate separate function, but if we had basically, like, I think about the Androscoggin County Housing and Homelessness Hub Coordinator, and I'm like, well, is there something that we can do on a local level that makes sense? And whether that's done by a nonprofit organization within our community or how it's done, I think it just, those cases would help, because it's difficult to just say, just go to GA.
I'll be right back. It's because I was, no, I got a bit, it's because I was in the hospital and I had air condition, and that's why I'm coughing. I'm just coughing there, and I'll be back. Thank you.
But it's difficult to say, well, just go to the GA or just call 211, right? Like, I think it's important that we make sure that people are okay.
I'm sure there's some resources, Counselor, that we can provide to you that you can share with her, such as Seniors Plus and other ones. So I'm sure we can pull a list together for you.
Do you have a copy of Councillor Chittum's markups, Madam Clerk?
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I guess Councillor Chittum, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. I guess one of the first questions is, do we ever define homeless? What constitutes? We use the adjective frequently, but do we define what constitutes homelessness? If I've had a fight with my parents and I run away from home, am I homeless? That, I think, needs to be clear. Homeless children or youth, this is a peccadillo of mine. It means a person 21 years of age or younger who is either accompanied or unaccompanied. We don't need that language in there. It means a homeless person under 21, period. Do you, as the city clerk, have automatic delegation authority so that any of the responsibilities that devolve to you through your title, can you assign those to a designate or a delegate?
As far as approving the license,
As far as anything?
the deputy city clerk has basically the authority to do everything I do for the most part. Is
Okay.
that?
Frequently in our ordinance, we say the city clerk or their designee, and I'm wondering if that's just unnecessary language.
It probably would be redundant to list it here because it's sort of identified in other
Okay.
mechanisms.
All right, so that's one of the things I've mentioned throughout here.
Did you want to say something?
Already passed over,
What's that?
so before we move on to your next one, can we answer this question? Because you need to
Please,
have-
please use the mic, Councillor Glenn. Thank you.
You need to have unaccompanied by parent, guardian, or caregiver, because the person's under 18 years of age. It does make a difference, and also makes a difference if the person is part of a homeless family. I believe that's part of the state's stuff, and what we're trying to do here is align ourselves with what's required.
Well, to me, in reading this, it says that this definition includes someone who's unaccompanied or someone who's accompanied. And I don't know how you can be anything but accompanied or unaccompanied. So I'm having trouble understanding what's the necessity of having unaccompanied by a parent or part of a family, because there's no other condition, to my reading.
Well, if it's a guardian or a caregiver, that's not part of a family. That's two different entities.
Well, homeless family means one or two caregiver persons, so that doesn't necessarily have to be a parent. One of my goals here is to try and make these ordinances as clean and simple as possible. And when we begin cluttering them up with redundant phrases and unnecessary verbiage, it makes them harder to read, harder to understand, and harder to enforce. So my sense is that you are if you are either unaccompanied or you are accompanied, then why do we even define those things?
And again, I would state, not everyone's at your education level. And a lot of people reading these things.
Permission to be recognized,
are at
please.
Yeah,
different
one second, Councilor
levels in that process.
Najin. Please continue, Councilor Gallant.
You know, that's part of, I like cleaning things up,
Excuse me,
but
Mr. Mayor.
depending who's reading it, it makes a difference to them and understanding,
Well-
to make it too generic.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just
Yes.
speak for a moment so we can kind of move this along. I believe all those definitions, Council Chittum, as Council Gallant is saying, we're taking out of state law. I just pulled up what homeless youth, and the homeless youth definition by state statute, which requires a lot in terms of how people get their funding, is homeless youth means a person 21 years of age or younger who is unaccompanied by a parent or guardian, is without shelter where appropriate care and supervision are available. So I believe when this definitions were made, they were basically trying to mirror state law so that any of the shelters that do the reporting can get their money. So I don't know if we really want to change these languages. Council Chittum may not agree with it, and I do agree with you that it seems kind of redundant, but this is based on state law definitions of why we have these definitions here. My suggestion would be is we kind of go towards the licensing in terms of the requirements that were put in for these shelters, that kind of is what we focus on, and then perhaps the wordsmithing and, maybe if there's some misspellings or some language. But I don't really want to change the definitions because that's really going to affect any shelter that opens up and their ability to get funding from the state.
Yeah, thank you, Administrator O'Malley. That was going to be my point. I'm pretty sure that we used commonly accepted definitions at the time when we created this document. Councilor Najin, yes.
Just to, not to belabor the point, I also agree with both the acting administrator and the mayor. I think it's important to get the spirit and not the letter in this reading, and I also think that I would be more than happy to defer to main housing definitions for any specific, for any of these ordinances, simply because they're going to be the funding source. And I don't know if anybody remembers what happened with referring to transitional housing, which is a HUD-funded program. It's a specific HUD-funded program and not like a catch-all meaning that completely derailed something that we were working on. So ultimately, I think main housing, HUD, any of the governing bodies that sit within these pieces, their definitions we should probably defer to. And when we have a working piece that we can then look and say, oh, wait, this should be or instead of and, and wordsmith it through. But I think spirit versus letter.
Yes, Councilor Chittum.
All right, with that in mind, then, I will elevate back up to 30,000 feet and stay away from adding commas and changing conjunctions. One of the things that I have in here, and you'll note in the margin, is we've got a definition for no barrier shelter.
What page are you on, Councilor?
I'm still under section, the first page, section 22-451 definitions.
Thank you.
No barrier shelter means a homeless shelter is defined in Appendix A, . Do we need the definition of a no barrier shelter? We go on to say in the ordinances that those are prohibited within the city. And yet our licensing ordinance does impose restrictions on homeless shelters, period. A homeless shelter may deny access to people who meet certain qualifications or fail to meet them. Is it necessary to, A, define a no-barrier shelter, which I don't believe shows up in the ordinance anywhere else other than the definitions, and B, to further preclude these no-barrier shelters from the city if our homeless shelter overall allows for the shelters to impose, and in fact, due to licensing, would require the homeless shelter to impose certain standards of admission.
Did you want to weigh in?
I was just going to say it's a policy decision of the council. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Councilor Harriman.
Thank you. Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, this was originally, the council wanted to prohibit low barrier shelters, and there wasn't really a solid definition of what a low barrier shelter was. So it ended up getting changed to no barrier, and I agree that it seems redundant because it's addressed other places in the ordinance. And I had on one of my suggestions to remove remove this definition here and remove, there's another one in the zoning and land use code.
Councillor Najin.
One of the pieces when we talk about naming a no barrier shelter and then eliminating the no barrier shelter piece, it's I believe there's certain rights that everyone has, and so there's a question of, this is why we refer to guests instead of tenants, right? Because ultimately, if you're a tenant, then you have specific rights by law. If you're running a facility where no barrier shelters are not prohibited, do you then have to take in people who are a danger to themselves and others? It's those questions that I'm worried about, the wordsmithing pieces that might preclude the ability of the shelter facilities people to protect their guests and also run and their employees and run an operation that is of benefit to the overall community.
Councillor Chittum.
Yeah, I'd argue, Councillor Najin, that ability rests within the definition of homeless shelter and the licensing ordinance that allows a shelter, and in fact requires a shelter to have certain protections in place.
Councillor Chittum.
I guess if I may continue on with definitions, there's some other wordsmithing, and I guess I'd ask the council's preference as to how this wordsmithing, which in some cases makes a big difference. If you replace "and" with "or," it changes the meaning of the sentence completely. And in my view, some of these conjunctions are inaccurate. They're inappropriate. I call that wordsmithing. I don't want to take the council's time to do that. How do you want to proceed with this? Shall I wordsmith the document and pass it out as a markup for general acceptance or rejection?
I would offer that since we're getting, kind of stay at the 30,000-foot level this evening, and especially since we're getting the shelter committee to take a look at it, they could also, offer feedback on changing ors to ands or vice versa and all the therefores.
All right, so then what I'm taking away is that I will go home, make this document, and disseminate it to the council and the clerk, who can then make it as public as is required. And then we can act on that individually. Okay.
But this evening, we'd certainly talk about substantive changes that we want to make. Councillor Najin, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's an excellent idea, and I think that some of that, the folks that deal with laws around both shelters and insurance, and there's several pieces where I think we could get feedback that maybe if we're removing a shall or changing an or, it could create a problem, so I think that's, yeah.
Councillor Glant, yes.
I would like to see, as part of the committee, that we get his marked up version and not get the version currently, so we're working on something not different. So if we vote tonight or change tonight, whatever we change, that we italic it or bold it, so when it comes to us, we can agree or disagree to come back again.
Well, we're not, if I may, Councillor, we're not voting on anything tonight. This is a workshop, and we're merely offering up our suggestions. So I don't think any decisions will be made. The council is here to provide guidance to the clerk. We will also be receiving guidance from the shelter committee, as we discussed earlier, and then we will take all of that guidance and then turn it into an agenda item.
So I would like to see the suggestions tonight sent to the committee, so we can see your suggestions to figure out if they match up or marry, in which direction we'd like to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. Yes, Councillor Najin.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I think what Councillor Gallant's referring to is that we have one copy we're all working from, one actual, okay. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Councillor Chittum.
Thank you. All right. Now, some of these may or may not be wordsmithing, and if you feel that if I'm flying too low, please stop me. I am now under section, I'm going to skip over 452 and go to 453, application submission requirements. I could not find an application form on the website. Is there a paper copy that's available in the clerk's office?
Yes.
Okay. Can that be put on the website?
We don't have most business license applications on the website, and that's actually really intentional, Counselor. The reason is we really want to have a conversation with the business applicant beforehand. We have had experiences in the past where they're still sort of working out their business plan and they're not quite sure, and they may apply for the wrong type of business license or an incomplete one, such as if they're going to be a restaurant, they'll do the liquor license, but they're going to have entertainment and not do special amusement. So it's very intentional that we don't have applications on there so we can have a conversation with folks, whether it's phone, email, or in person. They don't have to come in. But also because the applications are so limited in scope as to how many people actually need those. So we're happy to email to the council a copy of the renewal application as well as a copy of the new application.
Okay.
If you'd like to look at that, sure.
Great, thank you. I would like to see that. Similarly with the fees, I could not find any of the fees that are referenced in here, license fee, renewal fee.
Sure, those are on the website under the policy manual, but I can send you the link for that. It's $150 for a business license for a shelter. It used to be $88, and it was increased to $150, but I'll be happy to send you the link to all of our business license fees are on our website.
Yeah, I looked at that. I must have skipped right over it because I did find the policy on the fees. Still in section 453, application submission requirements. This is a substantive issue, and I'm down at the bottom of the page under 3B. Homeless shelter, and this speaks to Councillor Nagin's comments, the homeless shelter registers guests upon entry and service is declined to guests who do any of the following: carry weapons or exhibit violent behavior, are in possession of alcohol, illegal substances, or drug paraphernalia, do not observe rules, refuse to identify themselves, etc. My question is, why is alcohol proscribed? It's a legal substance. Are we depriving people who are homeless of the solace they may receive in a beer? That's a question. Why is alcohol proscribed?
Councillor Glant, you want to take this?
Because some people in there may not be able to prescribe, they may steal it from them. So you have to have some kind of security for the whole group, not the individual. Marijuana is legal too, but we don't allow that in shelters. It's just a controlling line that we carry. Most people carry in that situation.
Councillor Sol.
I believe, well, yeah, I don't believe, but if it's alcohol and it's, a homeless shelter is a business, essentially. You'd have to have a license to be able to provide, not provide, but to have alcohol in that establishment, is that correct?
I would equate that to hotels, and you don't need to have a liquor license for a guest of a hotel to bring in liquor.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I think any situation that could potentially involve an inebriated guest would be, would make life difficult for shelter staff. Councillor Harriman.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not all that concerned about removing that. I think my main concern would be if it is a congregate type of shelter, although alcohol is legal, just the issues that alcohol often causes in large groups of people. I could see a scenario where if it's a shelter that has maybe individual rooms for each guest, then maybe it wouldn't be such a problem, but I guess I would defer to others who have more experience in the area as to what they would think. I think probably best practice says that you wouldn't allow alcohol.
Councillor Longchamps.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Councillor Harriman. I don't think that shelters should allow alcohol.
Councillor Nagin.
One part to just throw in there when we're having the conversation about what is and is not allowed. Obviously, alcohol lowers inhibitions, creates challenges for management of staff. There are also conditions in which folks, especially in congregate care, they could be in rehabilitation programs or in AA, for instance, right? And then they're exposed to a challenge in those spaces. The one thing that does stick out that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I know that these rules came up as like a kind of like a fix-all, but I know of an individual who was staying in their car at a trailhead in the area, who had a firearm in their vehicle. And it made it very challenging for them to be able to check into any type of shelter facility. So I'm not saying people should be bringing weapons into facilities. I'm just saying that we need to think about in cases where people, like, if you're living on the streets, chances are you might have a knife. And yeah, you don't want to probably allow that into the shelter, but you might want to create a situation where you can secure it, right? Same type of situation, again, with, with the woman I know that was living in her car for a short time,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in favor of removing alcohol or suddenly, making arrangements for weapons or anything else. I think that's just going to create complications that shelters don't need to deal with. And I would imagine it would be difficult to find staff if a shelter had those, lack of safeguards in place. Councillor Chittum?
Yes, and I don't want to belabor the point. There are other provisions in these ordinances that talk about unruly behavior and misbehavior and behaviors rather than possession of items. My fear is that I do not want Lewiston's ordinances to be the imposition of Big Brother. I think we need to respect the fact that homeless people are people, and they have needs and desires the same as all the rest of us do. Later on, we're going to talk about a particularly egregious requirement in here that prohibits pets from homeless shelters. I am adamantly opposed to that, because in many instances, the pet is the solace, is the comfort companion, and to deprive that pet of, to deprive the homeless person of the pet, I think is criminal. So I feel much more strongly about that. But overall, I think we ought not to be trying to play Big Brother and dictating what people can and cannot do. We should be focusing on their behaviors. We should be focusing on community safety and individual safety rather than proscribing specific things. Marijuana, as you all know, is legal, and marijuana tends to suppress any kind of violent behaviors. I didn't make any point about this because it says illegal substances. My reading of this ordinance would allow a person to enter a homeless shelter carrying marijuana and under the influence of marijuana. So again, I do not want us to be the Big Brother that's going to say, because you find yourself in dire straits, there are going to be additional sanctions imposed on you.
Councillor Harriman?
Thank you. I don't know, this is maybe moving on a little bit, but we're still within the same section, 22-453. I guess this is a question for the city clerk as well. Under number 2, under the application, it requests 12 complete copies for the first time, and I see that Councilor Chittum has also noticed that. I know that all the materials that are required, there are building plans and all those things, and it can get fairly costly to print some of those out 12 times. Is that something that we need, or is that something that was, I guess I don't know exactly why that's in there.
Sure, 12 is in there for first-time applicants because for first-time applicants, the city council is the licensing authority and not the city clerk. Staff can approve renewals, but first-time licenses need to be approved or denied by the city council. So it was simply just a logistical matter. Either the city clerk's office makes all those copies or the applicant does, and it is not uncommon for folks going to the planning board that they need to provide the same number of copies as there are planning board members.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Najin?
Just out of curiosity, now that you've brought up that point, so when liquor licenses on renewals and those are brought before the council, right?
Renewals are not. So first-time liquor licenses are brought to council, and then for renewals, you receive communication, I think it's about 45 days beforehand, asking if anyone has any objection or concerns. And if you do, if we hear from elected officials that they have concerns, then we will put it on the council agenda to hold the public hearing. Usually the concern would be like from the abutters for noise or trash or behavior. But if we don't hear from counselors regarding any concerns, then staff will handle the renewals. At the beginning of every council year, so typically every 2 years, there's about 10 different items that the city council votes on, and those are giving staff the authority to approve items on their behalf, and one of those 10 is renewal of liquor licenses. But the council does always hold that authority under state law to do that if they'd like. But they're basically just delegating it to staff just from a logistical timing issue.
So is it event permits that we approve?
Special amusement permits.
Special amusement.
Special
Okay.
amusement permits, which is the live entertainment when liquor is served.
Okay, I don't want to get too lost in that.
Right.
It was
Yes.
one of those things I was
Yes.
figuring why one part comes and
Special
another one
amusement
doesn't.
renewals, yes, come to council, yes, thank you.
Yes. Counselor Gallant.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, why are we having any kind of licenses if we're going to worry about people and all their rights and everything else? Why do we have rules? Why do we have regulations? What you just said, if my understanding is correct, that we shouldn't have any of this stuff or anything, and people could do whatever they want because they're human beings. I'm just asking, from that standpoint, we have to have some kind of structure, and we're building as a structure here, for people to work and do what needs to be done. That's guess what my thought would be is why, and I think we should add marijuana. Thank you for bringing that up. I added that to my notes when it comes to our committee to put that in.
Oops. Counselors, I believe we've talked about this section at length. What I recommend is that we, because what we're really talking about here is best practices for a shelter. And so I think, we've all offered our input at this point, and we could turn this discussion over to the shelter committee and get their input. What's next, counselors? Counselor Chittum.
The rest of my markings on application submissions are by and large wordsmithing. One of the questions I have is a proscription allowing entry is if they have a known outstanding warrant for arrest. How does a shelter operator determine that?
Sure, so there is a form that the police department has created in conjunction with the shelters. The shelters have these forms, and as the shelter does intake for potential guests, they will provide that customer with a copy of that form. My understanding is they then take it to the police department. The police department will do a quick background check for any outstanding warrants, fill out the form, and then the applicant will bring it back to the homeless shelter manager.
So this can happen when an applicant goes to the shelter at 6 o'clock at night saying, I need to someplace to stay tonight?
I don't know the exact parameters of it. Brian may have some additional thoughts on that, but when we met with the shelter managers regarding this ordinance, they showed us a copy of the form, and they said that that's the process that has been in place for several years, and it works well. I don't know the details regarding timeline on it.
Since your name was mentioned, Administrator O'Malley, do you
It
have
was
any
mentioned,
thoughts on
yes.
this?
The police, they do that all the time. We're open 24/7. People will walk into the lobby and say, that I need a shelter referral, and then they'll run a warrants check on the person, fill out the form, and they bring it to wherever they're staying. That's been happening for years.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Najin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and that would be, I think, one of those pieces where if we're talking about like buffers, for instance, right, or eliminating, opening up certain spaces that would possibly be challenging otherwise, it's good to have a background check on people who are going to be staying in a neighborhood for a couple of weeks, right? So.
I'm not questioning whether it's a good or bad thing. I just want to know how it's done.
Gotcha.
If I'm operating a shelter, how do I know that there's a warrant outstanding for this individual? And that's been explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator O'Malley. Yes, Counselor Chittum, what's next?
Okay, on page Chapter 2275, Item 2, this may be word section, I don't know what subsection E of this article refers to. The last sentence in subsection 2. I couldn't find any reference to that. And that may be a wordsmithing thing, but so be it. Substantively, on item 4, there has been a limit of total beds, I guess, in the city of 120. Where did that number come from? How did we arrive at it? Does it make sense?
I mean, we could spend all night talking about how we got that number. It was completely arbitrary. I'd say we just move on and then decide if we even need a number or what number makes sense. Yeah, I'd rather not rehash past tonight. Councilor Harriman, did you have something?
Just without rehashing the past, I had it on my notes to just remove that cap.
Yep.
I would basically strike all of number 4. We will, if we end up in a position where we have more shelter beds than we need, then I think that's a good thing.
I'm pleased to hear you say that, Councilor Harriman.
I'm in support of removing the cap as well.
All right.
Councilor
Wordsmithing?
Najin.
I would just throw in there that I'm comfortable with removing the cap, but I do believe that we would have to tie that to zoning and land use pieces. So basically, you don't want a 200 bed shelter in a single family home neighborhood, for instance. You would have to, there should be some type of relationship with how these facilities fit into the neighborhoods in which they're going to be operating in. But as far as the cap on beds, I don't think it's necessary or needed.
Councilor Chittum.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little confused as to how item 10, and I'm on page 76 now. If a license has been found by somebody not to be approvable or should not be issued, it goes to the council, and that sounds like it's parallel with a new license. So I'm a little confused as to how this works on a renewal. And it may be simply that we need to tighten up the language or clarify that renewals would normally be handled by the city clerk's office unless the police chief says, no, there's a problem here. Then does it follow the same path as a new application for a new license? Does it have a notice public hearing, opportunity for public comment, and to the council for final say? There are also, and I don't know where they are in here, I guess it's under 455, appeals. There's a little bit of confusion in my mind as to whether the Board of Appeals or the City Council is the appropriate appeal authority. In some cases, it's the Board of Appeals, in other cases, it's the Council, and in some cases, it's Superior Court. So I think we could spend some time and consider who the appeal authority would be for various decisions. And I'm not proposing to answer that question tonight.
Councilor Najin.
When you mentioned that, it brought up the consideration of what we consider a housing unit, which is 300 square feet, right? Family housing, 300 square feet. And I think when we're looking at shelter facilities that are non-congregate, we need to consider, and also even transitional housing. When I'm using the term transitional housing, I'm speaking transitioning from being unhomed to having an address. The 300 square foot rule doesn't necessarily apply to a individual, and so I don't know if that falls under like hotels, or I think it would for a shelter facility, right? But if it was non-congregate, how does that? Because right now I believe that our boarding houses are required to have 300 square feet for single people. Correct?
I don't have that ordinance with me, I'm sorry.
I just
don't
wanted to
have
bring that piece up because there's a sticking point on number of people either in congregate care or in separate rooms, right? Like you don't want a situation where you have 200 people in beds in an open space that's 100 feet by 100 feet, right? Like that's not going to work. And it's the same situation when we're talking about where you have a door, right? You don't need 300 square feet to have a door, to your space. So if you're one person. So I just wanted to bring that up in this. I think that's going to take a little looking at maybe, but it comes back to underlying zoning too.
Right.
Councilor Harriman.
I just had another thing under this section, so it's 22-454, numbers 5 and 6. I don't know if the city council needs to review new applications. I don't know of any other types of businesses that we review new applications for. It's just something I'll put out there. Other people might disagree, but a new shelter is already going to go before the planning board. It's going to be reviewed by the city clerk's office. I don't know that the city council needs to go over it, but if others feel differently, it's not a big sticking point with me.
Councilor Chittum.
I had not considered that this is a unique situation, licensing shelters. You're absolutely right. If we are not reviewing new applications in other businesses, then why would we be doing that for shelters? So I'd like to consider that and think about it, but it makes sense to me that that would avoid the 12 copies too. If this is the only instance in which the city council is reviewing and approving or denying applications for new uses, then maybe we ought not to be doing that.
So you do that for liquor licenses, and then for any and all special amusement, new and renewal, and then any outdoor entertainment permits. Those aren't typically renewed because they're a one-time, because it's an event-based. So you do serve as the city licensing authority for new liquor licenses.
Okay.
New special amusements.
Okay. I thank you, Councilor Harriman. I'm going to cogitate on that for a few days.
Where did we end up with zoning requirements for a shelter?
Zoning requirements, you mean regarding the overlay district?
Yes, thank you.
We had the workshop last week, and the council made some recommendations along with the planning board, and I believe the code department is going to take a look at those, but they were also waiting for the results of this workshop, so things can be done simultaneously, so they are in conjunction with both ordinances.
Yeah, I mean, I think a shelter is very different than a restaurant or any other kind of establishment, and I think it's helpful to have city council oversight as we're, potentially approving something that is going to have, a massive impact on our city. So, especially if we end up having no zoning overlay. Councilor Nagy?
And just to back up what you're saying there, ultimately, I think taking some responsibility for the population of unhomed folks that are in our community is the focus of what we're trying to do here. And I think the last situation we ever want to be in is that we have 500 extra beds in a community without 500 extra unhomed folks, because just as we've seen when we experienced during COVID, when we had folks that were moved to our community through either general assistance or ARPA funds to temporary housing that then ended up on our streets. There's a challenge, I think, with having too much of a thing that, one, you have to fund it. That's one challenge for sure. And two, you don't need 500 beds if you have 200 unhomed people in your community. So.
Councilors, what's next? Councilor Harriman.
I've got something under section 22-458, under the approval and operation requirements. Got a handful of things here, but I'll start with just the first one.
One second, Councilor. I kind of want to go in order.
Okay.
Are we are really on, what, 454 right now? Review procedures. Do we have anything to talk about for 455, 456, or 457 before we move to 458?
Well, Mr. Mayor, we talked about
Should-
455 and where these appeals go for various denials or rejections, or appeals of a decision that council, that a license be issued, and there's an aggrieved abutter or neighbor who wants to appeal that decision. So that needs to be cleaned up. We did talk about 455.
Okay. And you were, just to be clear, you were looking for some rationale for it being what looks like Engineering Superior Court appeals?
Well, there are three places that appeals go to depending upon what is being appealed. One is the appeals board, another is the city council.
I understand.
And I think that all needs to be cleaned up, because there, in my reading of it this afternoon and 2 weeks ago, it wasn't clear to me why the rejection of a new license would be appealed differently than the rejection of a renewal license. So, again, I'm not proposing any solutions tonight, but I do think that we ought to take a close look at how that all works.
I think the clerk's office could review that and provide rationales to what are perceived discrepancies. Okay, closing out 455. Did we have anything for 456?
Mr. Mayor, again,
Counselor, yes.
I'm struggling between what is wordsmithing and what is substantive. In some cases, they overlap. One of the requirements of this is that there be quarterly meetings held at the discretion of city staff. Does this mean that anyone on the city, in the police department, the fire department, planning and code, and city administration, can request and mandate quarterly meetings with the shelter? How broad is that authority? And what sort of burden does it place? Or, alternatively, should we say that these aren't discretionary at all, that there should be quarterly meetings or semi-annual meetings, period?
It appears that these meetings are compulsory, mandated.
That's a question. Right now, they're discretionary at city staff, and it's not clear to me who in city staff
How the
has the
discretion-
authority.
Sure. So, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, if I could, so,
Yes, go ahead.
Counselor, you'll notice the very last line where you wrote why. The quarterly meeting language would apply to new licenses, not the 6 that have been renewed. This language, I believe, and Counselor Harriman can correct me, was similar to the language that we originally had in the methadone clinic ordinance when we were licensing the methadone clinic. It was a brand-new operation in the city, and so we had language in there that they would have, I believe it was quarterly, might have been twice a year, I don't remember, meetings with the police chief and the city administrator just to touch base and check in. We eventually amended that and removed it from the ordinance. Instead of it being required, it was just optional. And it was really just to keep the lines of communication open to sit down and review and just discuss. So when the license came up for renewal a year later, they may not be shocked as to if there were issues, concerns, whatever. Again, it was just a communication piece, but certainly Councilor Harriman may have better recollection. I wasn't on the original task force, so I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the committee.
Councilor Harriman, did you want to weigh in?
No, I believe that's where that came from.
Councilor Najin.
Yeah, those quarterly meetings could literally, 1, not happen at all, or 2, be a quick phone call. I think one of the things, from administrator or the administration's office to the facility, I think one of the things that we were trying to establish originally, which didn't happen, was more reporting from the organizations that already exist and better communication in order to be like, how many beds are available tonight, right? Who has beds available? And I think having that open line of communication that is not necessarily mandatory unless it has to become so. It allows it so that maybe we get a little bit more organized around the services that are being provided and ways we can refer people. Like, for instance, if we're saying somebody comes to GA, but really maybe they need a caseworker, all of those pieces.
Councilor Chittum?
Yeah, my question was, and I've heard from existing shelters that this ordinance is burdensome, and it's not my intent to create more burden. But my question is, if optional quarterly meetings or optional meetings of any frequency are desirable for new installations, why would they not also be desirable for existing shelters? Which runs counter to my desire not to burden existing shelters. But if it's a good idea for new shelters, why isn't it a good idea for all shelters?
And I believe it's simply because they have an established track record in the city. Hope Haven has been licensed with the city for over 40 years. Some of the others have been for over 10 years, over 15 years. So I think it's just a matter of they have an established reputation, line of communication already. This would be for brand new shelters. So again, it's just trying to establish that line of communication, that expectation. It is letting them know that there will be an expectation to potentially have meetings on site at the shelter by city staff should the need arise. I think it's really just putting them on notice in a sense.
Is there any thought to, well, again, it's discretionary, so that if you've got a perfect shelter that's running in complete compliance and no neighbor complaints, then presumably the city staff would say at our discretion, there's no need for any meetings. Okay.
Councilor Najin?
One of the pieces in there, again, is that the shelters that currently exist, most of them are faith-based, and so there were questions concerning self-reporting as far as numbers that we could use when we're applying for grant pieces as well. And when we talk about onerous regulations, some of that is that we've carved out an exemption for faith-based organizations that already exist, but new ones will not have the same, like they will have to be, they will have to comply the same way any other shelter would comply. And I do think that, I believe the faith-based organizations are kind of like bonus shelters, so to speak, right? They're extra. And so like, I'm not necessarily as wanting to put the same restrictions on the faith-based shelters, but I mean, that's up to y'all, so.
Well, Councilor Herman, did you have something?
I was just going to move on to 22-458 if we're...
We're not quite there yet, Councilor. So, yeah, I mean, it's discretionary, but on the part of city staff. I think if city staff feel that they need to have a meeting with the shelter, they should be able to do that. And perhaps this language could be cleaned up a little bit, but I think it should mostly remain. Councilor Chittum, did you have something to add?
Not to that, no. I think the horse is pretty dead on it.
Okay.
But I'd like to move on to 457 if...
We are now at 457. Yes, Councilor Chittum.
All right, item 3, toward the bottom of the page, we have a reference to state law. And then there's a curious phrase in here. The City Council finds that the remedies provided under the 30A MRSA 4452 apply to the violation of this article, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why is this in our ordinance?
I'm going to guess it was a recommendation from the ad hoc shelter committee, and I believe they looked at several different model ordinances from different communities in Maine and New Hampshire. So I'm guessing that language was pulled out of another ordinance from another town that they looked at, and they felt it was applicable. It may be language that ties back to the state somehow because it is referencing state law. I don't know for sure. That's just a guess because I know they looked at several model ordinances from other communities.
I would advocate removing that and leaving only the first sentence, penalties may be ordered by. I don't think it's necessary to, again, in the interest of simplifying and decluttering, I don't think it's necessary for us to find in our ordinance that a particular state law applies when the state law itself would define that.
Yeah, I think we can, I guess, get a handle on what state law it's referencing, and then refer that to the shelter committee. Anything further for 457?
Not for me.
Councilor Harriman, I believe we're up to 458.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a few here, but the first one would be 458 subsections 2 and 3, 24/7 operation. I know that was a recommendation from the previous shelter committee, and as best practices, I'm just wondering if that is possibly too onerous for some shelters, and I just wonder if others have any other thoughts on that. I know what we don't want to do is have a shelter that's only open from this time to this time, and then everybody has to leave, and then they end up in the neighborhood with nowhere to go. So I'm just bringing that up as a possibility. If that's restricting shelters from being able to open, we might want to look at that. But I'd be interested to hear what others think.
Councilor Najin?
I think that what you're suggesting is actually creating a situation that we're dealing with right now. Like we need some type of drop-in center or facility to keep people who are guests from some of our from misusing some of our public space, right? And so that's I think for future shelters, I would be supportive of having either a 24-hour rule, or possibly there could be some type of requirement for, especially when we're talking about non-state funded, right? Where there's a requirement that you do leave the facility to either volunteer or go to counseling services or whatever it might be, right? There are shelter services that run in this community that they don't just close their doors and say, go to the library, right? They say, you've got something you have to go do. And so, I'm not necessarily against that, but I am against the shelter just closing and being like, we're not open from 7 to 3, go figure something out, so.
Yes, as it's like 10 degrees outside. And, I think we just need to remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, make a difference in our city and then make a difference for our unhoused community. And the idea was that we would be open, 24/7, allow them to stay, and then receive services during the day to hopefully, move them from unhoused to housed and get them, social and support services that are needed to make a difference in their lives. Councilor Gallant.
Thank you, Mayor. Same item number 2, I would like to remove once a guest is registered, they must have 24/7 use. What that allows somebody to do is sign up in the morning, go off and do their drugs or whatever they want to do and get to come back later. Most shelters run it when you check in, you're in for a duration of time. When you leave, that slot opens up for a new person, in many cases, because people don't always come back. So that leads it to believe that if I have checked it in the morning, I've got a guaranteed place to sleep tonight. That's why many of the shelters in town don't do that. They have a certain sign-up time when you sign or check in. So I don't particularly like that in there. It allows the people operating the shelter to say, once you registered, you're in. Once you leave, you're out. You're not going to leave all your stuff behind and go out in town and do whatever you're going to do and things of that nature. So I don't like that particular line.
Councilor Roy, did you have something?
Thank you. My thought was, I think if we leave it open during the day, that gives time for working on the transitional parts of this, right? So we're looking at counseling, we're looking at housing searches, we're looking at community-based items, and I think that's really important here as we move people through. So I think, leaving it open 24/7, it's one, gets people out of the cold, but it's also getting them to work through the program, which is really important.
Councilor Najin.
just on that level as well, I know that, for instance, having a certain lock-in time allows you to, know how many beds you have, right? And so if there are open beds, you can make those available. And then also, if folks leave the facility, specifically with substance use, use drugs, come back into the facility, that can be a challenge. And with the way this is written, I think it's challenging for, I look at Milestones, the operation that Milestones runs, and they have basically an overnight lockdown, right? Like, so if you're taken in because you're highly inebriated, usually in a situation where it could be fatal in some cases if you're not cared to, and you sign yourself in, or you're taken in if you're incapacitated. There's a doctor, CNA's there. They lock the doors. You're not allowed out until the morning, and you can sign out in the morning, but they don't allow you to leave when you come in and you've got a blood alcohol content of 0.17, right? And do we want to make it so that a facility like that will never exist here? I don't know.
Yes, further comments on 458. Councillor Chittum?
Yeah, I think that to Councillor Gland's point, the first two sentences of that section 2 say two completely different things. One is that the shelter shall always be open, and the other is that once you're in, you've got a guaranteed space. Those are not connected, and I have no problem with removing this requirement that the guest have 24/7 access to the facility.
Yeah, that's something that I would like the shelter committee to weigh in on. Further, Councillor Herman, did you have anything else for 458?
I have some more, but I would let other councilors weigh in as well.
Well, I'm recognizing you now. Can please continue.
All right, the next one would be number 6, public transportation. I know that I think that was also a recommendation from the previous shelter committee. Best practice would be to be within quarter mile of public transit, but I wouldn't want that to prohibit a shelter from opening, half a mile from public transit. Half a mile is really not that bad of a walk if you are physically able. And we always have taxis and other forms of transportation so people can get to and from shelters. So I would either strike that or amend it to be a different distance.
I'll have you finish all of 458 if you had other items.
All right, the next one would be, and this one might take some discussion, number 7, proximity to schools and daycares. It's currently set at a 250-foot buffer from the property line. My reasoning would be I would take that buffer away. I see shelters as being fairly similar to boarding houses and hotels as far as their operation, and we don't have any buffers for those uses. So I don't know why we would single out homeless shelters for that sort of a distance away from schools and daycares. And then the last one would be number 14, and Councillor Chittum mentioned it earlier, the requirement that guests cannot bring pets into the shelter. I would just leave that up to the individual shelters, as if they want to allow pets, they can do that. If they don't want to, they can do that. That's all I've got for 458.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gallant, yes.
I'll jump on number 7.
Can please use your mic, Councillor?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, number 7, I believe we need a buffer. The difference between a hotel and a boarding place is people aren't hanging outside, smoking, hanging out all day. Okay, people at shelters hang out all day. So that's going to be a reason. So if it was in your neighborhood next door to you, you're going to want to have 20, 30 people out there smoking and carrying on. We already had a situation where a store complained about people hanging out in front of their store. You're going to have complaint after complaint. So a buffer provides a safety zone for those individuals in that particular area, and I think it's important to have that as a minimum. I advocated for 500 feet when it first came about, so 250 I think is probably practical based on us now opening up the whole city in a sense, except for the business areas, which is important, and the river walk, which is important. We want to make sure that we cover those areas, but I think it should be open up to the city, but 250 gives us a protection zone for our children and our elderly.
Councillor Chittum.
Yeah, I concur with Councillor Harriman that it's entirely conceivable that a homeless shelter will open up that has concierge service, and they have a van that can take people to appointments. So this limitation to within a quarter mile of public transport makes no sense to me at all. Further, I disagree with my good friend Councillor Gallant on the proximity to schools and daycares. I think that establishing a buffer around the homeless shelter is essentially demonizing the patrons, the guests of that homeless shelter. Yes, some of the behaviors aren't all that great, but people misbehave in all kinds of situations. I would advocate that homeless shelters be reviewed by the planning board and conform with the requirements of the zone, period, and they not be singled out as special places that require isolation from other places.
We're coming back to Councillor Chittum's good friend in a minute here. So. Councillor Najin.
No.
So, just real quick on all of these issues, we could change this so that we're talking about similar to like the design standards, right? For downtown businesses. So, like, you could, instead of being like it has to be within a quarter of a mile of public transportation, it would be great, by the way, if everything was within a quarter mile of public transportation in the city. That would be fantastic. But we could change that to it would be desirable, right? Like that it would be within a quarter of a mile of public transportation, or there was some transportation option made available. And to speak to the buffer pieces, there is, I think, a case where single individuals who are staying at a shelter, who live in a shelter situation where it's not necessarily there's not like a strict like, again, I'm going to refer back to Shelter by Jesus, which is one of those things too when we're talking about when you allow people in and out. Like, it's a challenge to work second shift at some of the shelter facilities. It's something to think about. But you don't necessarily want, single individuals who have no long-standing relationship with the people who are running the shelter facility or the people who are staying at the facility to be, basically hanging out in front of the public school, right? Like, I think there's a challenge there but then again, like, trafficked women, for instance, I don't see why there would be a concern about how close they would be to a school. I think that, it comes back to congregate care and overnight solutions versus folks who are in a program, right? And so it's a challenge because I do see the need for the buffer in certain cases. And so maybe there's a piece there where if the neighboring facilities weren't, like, let's say municipal facilities, they could have the option of waivering it, for instance. So, like, let's say I'm running a daycare and somebody wants to put in a facility that's going to handle domestic violence that takes in single women or single men, right? In a case like, because it's written specifically for families right now, right? They could possibly waiver that. It's just a thought. When you think about 250 feet, when you break down 250...
At those.
How about bars and establishments like that?
The state law does have language, distance from a religious facility, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Harriman.
Thank you. To that point, one of the things that I advocated for when we were talking about marijuana business licensing, I believe there are buffers, and I pointed out that a pharmacy or a liquor store, we don't have buffers. So I don't really see, in that case, I didn't really see the logic of having a buffer around a marijuana store, but not a liquor store. But anyway, on to this, I would respectfully disagree with Councilor Gallant about boarding houses. There's a particular boarding house on Bartlett Street that abuts the property line of a school, and every time I go by, there's a group of people hanging out, smoking, having campfires. I don't know that they're bothering anybody, but if if they were, there are other ways to address that. There's a good neighbor policy that's further on in this ordinance that I think could address that. I just feel like it's really singling out homeless shelters to put a buffer on them.
At this point, if it pleases the councilors, we've discussed buffers a lot, and I think we can get. Hold on, Councilor Gallant. We've discussed buffers quite a bit this evening, as we did the other night as well, and I think we could get the shelter committee to weigh in on buffers. Okay. Anything else about 458? And I like the idea of, if a shelter wants to submit an application and they have a plan to take care of guest pets, like we shouldn't stop that. So if they, leaving up to the shelter, I'd be in favor of that. Councilor Roy?
Thank you. I would just say, if somebody's highly allergic to pets, that's definitely going to be a deterrent. I'm not going to go stay in a shelter because I would not be able to stay more than 10 minutes. I love animals. I love pets to death. I just can't be around them. So.
Councilor Nagy?
Yeah, and just to reiterate that point, I think there are insurance considerations. That's one piece. I think also that there are cultural issues with certain pets, for sure, as well as hygiene issues. And I do know that the majority of folks that I've met that have pets that are on homes, that their animals are absolutely wonderful and very well behaved, but that's not always the case. So.
Councilor Chittum?
This isn't the function of the city of Lewiston or government. This would be in the operating plan of the shelter. If they want to proscribe pets, that's fine. We should not be in the position of saying you can't have pets in a shelter. That's just not good governance.
Councilor Gallant?
I was going to agree with that as well. I believe the shelters should make their own decisions because oftentimes the shelters that I've researched that do allow pets require them to show rabies in all the shots, and that they're usually an ADA or an assistant animal. So most shelters have that in their own language. So in ours, I don't feel it should be a necessity.
Councilor Roy?
Thank you. I would put that out there to the community if anybody wants to open up a pet sitting for free for people, for shelter animals. That's a necessity all over the place. There's no shelters in a lot of places that allow pets, and people that are homeless do have pets. So if there's somebody wants to run a nonprofit or something like that, that would be great because this is a needed thing in our city, I think.
Councilor Longchamps?
I do believe that if anyone's familiar with community critters, so that's one of their goals is to open up some sort of animal shelter for the homeless folks that are going to stay in a shelter that can't take their pets. So hopefully
Mr.
that
Mayor,
will
we're
come.
going to strike part 14 from that. I think everyone's in agreement, kind of a thumb. It seems like a thumbs up on that one.
Quite possibly, but yeah, we're also going to get input from the shelter committee. Councilor Nagy?
One of the things to think about too is when these ordinances were written, they were written without considering the fact that there would be a city-directed shelter at some point in time, right? And so we were saying every facility has to be able to provide something that doesn't create an obstacle for people to stay at the facilities, right? And so if there's a city-directed shelter that's running based on main housing standards, I think some of these things will just fall into line 100%. And if other organizations want to, for instance, as you said, take in pets, fine, right? So just to name that, because I think we're getting kind of stuck on semantics a little bit here and there, but there's two different purposes, right? The one piece is what we're going to be filling, and the other piece is to not preclude other people from doing things.
Anything further about 458 before we move to 459?
Go
Council?
back to number 4, please.
Yes, go ahead.
I think 4 should be scratched altogether. I don't think we should tell their main housing that they have to monitor or do anything with any shelter. Again, speaking to, I don't think it's our authority. I think 4 is not required.
I would like the shelter committee to weigh in on that. Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that is best practice and was highly recommended by the shelter committee. If we did strike it, though, practically, it wouldn't matter because any shelter is going to be funded by main housing, and they're going to require that anyway. So it wouldn't matter if we kept it or took it out for the most part.
But for the shelters who are not funded by them, who are private, it makes a requirement, and we can't make a requirement on somebody who's not going to use Maine. My point is, we're making a requirement for everyone, and it shouldn't apply to that.
I see.
Well, it says, I mean, unless I'm reading this wrong, this requirement is applicable only to homeless shelters participating in the main housing monitoring program. So, Councilor Chittum?
Yeah, my reading of this is that if the Maine Housing Authority requires monitoring, that those reports need to be provided to the city. That's all that says.
Okay, are we good with 458, councilors? We're now moving to, yes, Councilor Longchamps.
Sorry, I just have a quick question. If we are in agreement of something and want to strike something, why does it have to go back to the shelter committee, then to come back to us?
So I'll be happy to take that question. So the shelter committee includes a number of professionals and people with lived experience. And while we're all very smart around the table here, I think some things really need to be looked at by the shelter committee and like professionals who are working in the field. Councilor Roy.
Thank you. One of the things I want to say is we have a really strict deadline on what we need to do.
Right.
And to add this to the deadline is just going to prolong a shelter.
I understand completely, but I do think we need some input from the shelter committee on at least some of these items.
And I agree.
Given their body of experience that lives, within the members of that committee.
100% agree with you, Mr. Mayor, but I will say this. We have a deadline for funding for a shelter that we really, really need to stick to. This can come after that, but it can't wait, obviously, right? So that's what I'm saying. I just don't believe we're going to have a whole lot of time to go through piece by piece and give you direction. That's just, sorry, I didn't mean to slam my pen. that just happened. I mean, I'm just saying I just don't think that we're going to have the time to do that. I mean, I can bring it back to the shelter committee and give you a realistic timeline, but to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to happen.
I understand completely, and I realize we're working with time constraints. I guess I would like you to have that conversation with the shelter committee. Councilor Glant?
And echoing what he's talking about, I would like, if we want to strike something here, that it shows up striked, so when it comes to us, we know what your opinion is. So I think in some method, someone needs to draw lines through number 14 and have a cheat sheet that says, council says strike this, whatever that is, and that makes it clearer for us, then we're not going to have to go back and forth.
Good
We're going to
point.
agree or disagree with you.
Yeah, no, the shelter committee should certainly understand where the council's at. Okay.
And I would agree with that. Sorry, I would agree with that to make it easier on the committee. That would be excellent.
Councilor Najin?
There'll also have to be 2 public meetings in order to adopt any of these changes. And so, and not to lose steam, but let's push through. let's get through this.
We are moving on to 459. Are there any concerns about 459, councilors? Councilor Chittum.
Yeah, I'm trying to find what my note means. On page 80, the very last sentence, it exempts section 11 from a requirement that existing shelters comply by 2028. And I've written here, why exempt this section 11? And I'm having trouble understanding where section 11 is, what section 11 refers to.
So section 11, Counselor, refers to, if you go to the previous page, page 79.
Yeah.
Section 11, the homeless children.
Okay.
Yes, and the mayor and Counselor Harriman can correct me. My recollection is the executive director of New Beginnings asked that this be exempt because part of it, I believe they already do this, but the other part of me, I'm trying to remember what the rationale was. None of the other 5 shelters take children, to my recollection, so it's just New Beginnings. I do remember the executive director here and explaining information. I believe it was at his request that they be exempt because they already do that. There's some difficulty establishing relationships. I'm not portraying it well, and I apologize, but I believe that that change wasn't done in a vacuum. It was done in conjunction with the folks from New Beginnings. So, but again, Counselor Harriman probably has a better recollection than I do.
Councilor Harriman.
Well, as I remember, this also evolved from another, this requirement was originally that homeless youth had to go to school. That was something that the previous council wanted to put in there. But then there were other issues where, you know, what if the child is below school age? And, you know, what if there are other issues where they aren't able to do that? So it was trying to be a restriction on what homeless children had to do, and then I think it evolved into this, and then there was the piece with New Beginnings as well.
Thank you, Councilor. That sounds about right. Councilor Gallant.
Yeah, I want to agree. The previous wording was to try to force them or organizations that force children to go to school or attend school, and that was not the, initially the goal would be to get them back in that situation and moving forward, but this requirement would make them have to do that, and I don't think that's right,
Councilor Chittum.
Yeah, I'm still puzzled because section 11 says that these shelters must create and maintain relationships with the McKinney-Vento liaison, who is a school department employee. It must create, in my reading, an atmosphere that will encourage the child to become educated, to get an education. And how you can exempt an organization from creating an atmosphere that encourages education is beyond me. And maybe I'd need to have New Beginnings come back and
I would say this is definitely something we send to the committee. I'm sure Chris will explain it. My recollection is the same as Kathy's, that he came in, he gave his reasoning why, and it was well thought out of why they're complying with educational requirements, but with this one, I don't remember what exactly it was about 2 years ago, but I'm sure Chris Bicknell, the director of New Beginnings, could probably shoot us off an email and explain why that is. Because they're very supportive of the youth and all that, Councilor Chittum. It's not like they're trying to go around that stuff.
Well, I understand that, yes. And
so I can't explain to you now why we exempted it back then, but I know there was a huge discussion about why that section was put in.
All right, let's have that discussion again for the benefit of the new councilors, if we could.
Well, yes, Councilor Roy would be so kind as to add that to the list. All right. Okay. Anything about 460? It looks like, any other councilors have anything about 460, 461, or 462? Councilor Chittum, yes?
Yeah, just, I think we've finished now, so as to process, how do we want to proceed at this point? I'm offering myself, I can create a Word document that's marked up, reflecting wordsmithing and substantive changes for distribution to the world. Is that the way we want to proceed?
Councilor Harriman?
Well, I think you provided your copy, to all of us and to the city clerk. I was thinking that the city clerk and city staff would take that and the suggestions that we've all voiced and compile them into a marked up copy to bring back to us at our, if not our next meeting, a meeting coming up. And then we'll have 2 readings of that, and we can make other minor changes as they are needed.
Councilor Najin?
So at the 30,000-foot view, I think beds, number of beds, right? That's one piece. Zoning appropriate facilities. So possibly conditional use permits. I think that would probably require some feedback from the planning board or from planning and code. But I think there are places where, for instance, if it is zoned NCB, but it's on the edge of urban enterprise, and it could be a 30-bed facility without causing an issue, right? It depends. So those are 2 pieces. I think the buffer piece was still undefined at this point, but I do know that there's a lot of issues with it. And then there's the pets piece, right? Was there any other top?
Councilor Glant?
I believe that Councilor Chittiman, the clerk, city clerk, will be able to iron out the wordsmithing. I would like to see a copy to us for our meeting on Monday, the 29th, if that's possible, if that puts you too far under the gun, next Monday. If you want us to take a look at it and present it to our team, the sooner we get it, the better, and we can then let you know if we have a possibility of doing something with it before our deadline of August 20th that we are up against the wall against, or let you know when we can actually push things forward.
So Council, just for clarification, when you say you're meeting on Monday, July 29th, you're referring to the Homeless Shelter
Yes,
Committee?
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Just for
By us, he means the shelter committee, yes.
Thank you.
Surprise, we're having another meeting.
You didn't know we were coming in at 29.
And-
No, sorry, I jumped the cabin.
And I understand that there's limited time, but my guess is, once Mr. Stoudemire sees this document, it's going to jog his memory and, provide feedback in short order. Okay. Yes, Councilor Chittum?
Yeah, this being a workshop, I wonder if Mr. Settleman is here, if he,
He's not here.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at Kevin.
Kevin Boyd.
And I'm confusing you, I'm sorry.
I've used his
Kevin.
name a lot. Hopefully he's watching. We love you, Mr. Settlemeyer. Okay, I think that concludes that agenda item. Madam Clerk, I think we're heading into executive session.
Fantastic.
Are you prepared to do that from there?
I
Or
did not bring that sheet with me, but give me a second and I'll head back over here.
Or I could read it, but there you go. There you go.
Executive session to discuss real estate negotiations of which the premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive bargaining position of the city. Requested action, to enter into an executive session pursuant to Maine Revised Statutes Annotated Title I, Section 4056C, to discuss real estate negotiations of which the premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive bargaining position of the city.
may I have a motion, please?
So,
Councilor Glant, second by Councilor Harriman. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Council from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
No.
Ward 7?
No.
Motion passed by a vote of 5-2, I think.
Can we get some oil for this? I don't like that anymore. Can we just get oil for that?
WD-40 Admiral. Good night, Lewiston. Thank you. We're heading into executive session. We'll not be back.